You were just a new face for me, baby. It's over now.
It's a dare to you. Pour on her.
That's easy.
Look at you crying your heart out!
The music was still playing when Aiden said her name, not to talk to her. To get the room's attention, June turned around, and he was already standing behind her, close enough that she thought for a second he was about to say something normal. Then she saw the girl next to him, and the way his friends had gone quiet in that specific way. The way people go quiet when they're waiting for a punchline. Aiden smiled. He said, "Hey, I actually need to tell you something. So we're done. That's over," or said it casually. The way you tell someone their cab is here. I've been seeing Brittany for the past few weeks, and honestly, it was always more of a thing with her anyway, so... Someone in the group laughed. June looked at him. She said, "Are you serious right now?" I mean, yeah. He glanced back at his friends. I didn't really know how to bring it up, so... He shrugged. Actually shrugged. Now you know. A phone came up somewhere to her left. Then another one. Brittany leaned into Aiden's shoulder and looked at June the way you look at something mildly interesting. She said, "She looks confused." More laughter. Louder this time. June stood there with her drink in her hand and her face completely still because she had not yet caught up to what was happening, and her body didn't know what to do with it. She wasn't in a fight. She wasn't being yelled at. She was just standing in the middle of a room full of people while they filmed her and waited to see what she would do. Brittany looked up at Aiden and said, "It's a dare. Do it. Come on." Aiden looked at June. He was still smiling. He reached over to the table beside him without breaking eye contact and picked up a full glass. He lifted it, and then a hand appeared from the left, and a man stepped in front of her just suddenly there, and the drink hit the front of his white shirt and stopped. The room went completely silent. The man looked down at his chest for exactly 1 second. Then he looked up at Aiden. He said, "Put it down." There was no anger in it. Just a statement. Aiden put the glass down. Nobody laughed. Nobody moved. The phones were still up, but nobody was sure anymore what they were filming or whether they should be. The man stood there, shirt soaked, looking at Aiden the way someone looks at a problem they've already decided how to solve, and the entire room could feel that whatever was about to happen next, it wasn't going to go the way this party was supposed to go. June had been in New York for 7 months when the worst night of her life happened at a rooftop party on the Upper East Side. She grew up in Milford, Pennsylvania. Small town. The kind of place where everyone knows your family, where Friday nights mean the diner on Main Street, and where a scholarship to a university in Manhattan is the biggest thing that's happened to your household in a generation. Her grandmother had cried at the kitchen table when the letter came. Her mom had framed it. June had packed 2 bags, driven her used Honda for hours south, and arrived in New York City ready to work hard and stay out of trouble. She was good at both of those things. What she was not prepared for was the other. A world that existed inside the same university. The one with old money, and private parties, and a social cruelty so refined it barely looked like cruelty at all. Aiden Whitmore was part of that world. June had not known that when she met him. He was charming and funny, and he'd asked for her number after a study group in October. She'd thought he was genuine. For about 3 months, she believed he was. He took her to nice restaurants and texted her back quickly and said the right things. She didn't know he had a reputation, or that his friends had dared him to date the scholarship girl, or that the whole thing had been a joke to him from the start. She found all of that out at the party. It was held in a penthouse apartment on the Upper East Side, the kind of place June had only seen in movies. One of the students had a family that owned the building. There were views of the city in every direction, and a bar that someone's parents had clearly paid for. June had worn a blue dress she'd bought specifically for the occasion. She'd spent 40 minutes on her hair. Aiden was already there when she arrived. He was standing in the middle of the room with his friends, relaxed and laughing, and when he saw her walk in, he didn't come over. He just looked at her for a second and then turned back to his group. She should have left then. She knows that now. Instead, she got a drink and stood near the windows and told herself she was being paranoid. People get caught up talking at parties. It didn't mean anything. Then he walked toward her, and she felt relieved. And then she saw the girl behind him. He stopped right in front of June. He said her name out loud, clearly, so the people nearby could hear. And then he said, "This is Brittany. We've been seeing each other," just like that. Straight out. No hesitation. June looked at him. She didn't fully understand what was happening for about 2 seconds. Then she did. The people around them were already reacting. The kind of reaction where everyone knows something was planned. Someone laughed. Someone else started filming on their phone. Aiden's girlfriend, Brittany, didn't even look uncomfortable. She looked like she'd been told what was going to happen. June stood there with her drink in her hand and didn't move. She didn't cry, not yet. She just stood there while people filmed and laughed, and Aiden smiled like he'd just finished a performance. Then Brittany leaned over and said something to him. June heard it. Her. Pour the drink on her. Aiden thought about it for about half a second. Then he reached over to the table next to him and picked up a full glass. He was still smiling when he lifted it, and then a hand came out of nowhere, Man stepped directly between them, not rushing. Not dramatic, just there, and the drink hit his chest instead of June's face. It soaked through his white dress shirt and spread dark across the front of it. The room went quiet, immediately, not gradually. Immediately, Aiden froze. Brittany froze. The people filming lowered their phones without realizing they were doing it. Even the background chatter in the rest of the room dropped. Because something about the way the space had changed made people stop and look. The man was tall. He didn't look angry. He looked at Aiden the way someone looks at a situation they've already decided how to handle, he said. Put it down. Aiden put the glass down. Nobody in that room knew the man's name except the people who worked for him. But everyone in that room could feel what he was. He didn't explain himself. He didn't threaten anyone. He just reached over to a passing server's tray and picked up a full drink. Calm, unhurried. Like he'd just decided what he wanted, and he poured it directly onto Aiden's shoulder, not through it. Poured it slow. Aiden made a sound and stepped back. The people beside him stepped back faster. 2 of them practically ran to the wall. The man's guys, 3 of them positioned around the room, had their phones out. Filming quietly without making it a show, he went through Aiden's whole group. One by one, never raised his voice. Never looked like he was in a hurry. He used the music that was still playing in the background, like it was background to his own personal business. And when he was done, Aiden and every single one of his friends were standing there soaked, while the entire party watched in complete silence. Then the man straightened up, looked around the room once, and walked over to June. He looked at her for a moment. She didn't know what to say. She didn't say anything. He said, "Come on." She followed him, in the elevator going down. June stood with her bag in both hands and tried to process everything that had just happened. The man stood next to her and looked at the floor numbers like nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. She said, "Who are you?" He didn't answer. She tried again. "Why did you don't?" She stopped talking. The lobby doors opened. He walked her outside onto the sidewalk. The September night was cool, and the street was normal and loud, and it felt strange after the silence of that room upstairs. He stopped at the edge of the building's awning and reached into his jacket and held out a card. Plain white. Just a phone number. No name. If something comes up, he said. June took it. Something like what? He looked at her for a moment, not unfriendly, just direct, and then he went back inside. The door closed. June stood alone on the upper, east side sidewalk holding a card with nothing on it but a number. 32 floors up, the party was still going. Down here the street was just a street, and she was just a girl from Milford, Pennsylvania, in a blue dress. Trying to figure out what she'd just witnessed, she put the card in her jacket pocket and walked to the subway by Monday morning. Everyone at her university had seen the video. Someone had taken the footage from multiple angles and edited it together. It spread through group chats over the weekend, and by the time June got to campus, it was everywhere. Her lab partner showed it to her without saying anything, just held the phone up and let her watch. June watched it twice. Aiden's face when the first drink hit. His friend stepping backward. The wall. She handed the phone back and went to her lecture and sat in the 3rd row and stared at the board. The man in the video had no name attached to him. No one in the comments seemed to know who he was. But the way the room had reacted to him, that part was clear even on a phone screen. She kept the card in her jacket pocket. She didn't call. 3 weeks later, her landlord died. His name was Mr. Feeney. He was 71. He'd had the building on West 52nd for over a decade. And he'd rented to students and young workers because he liked having people around. He died on a Tuesday night, in his sleep. His daughter knocked on each door Wednesday afternoon and told them. She said the family would be in touch about the building. They were in touch 2 weeks later with 30 days' notice. They had a buyer. The building was being sold. June sat on her bed with a legal pad and worked through every option she could think of. Everything close to campus either cost more than her stipend covered or was already gone. She had $340 in savings. She had 30 days. She sat with the legal pad for a long time. Then she got up, found her jacket on the hook, and took the card out of the pocket. She stood in the kitchen and looked at the number. She thought about what kind of person hands out a card like this. She thought about what calling it might mean. She thought about 30 days and $340. She dialed. He picked up on the second ring. She said, "This is June, from the party in September. With the drink, I know who you are." She hadn't expected that. She said, "I have a housing problem." Address? She gave him her current address. She heard something faint on his end. Typing, maybe. He said, 414 West 46th. Hell's Kitchen. Second floor. Keys under the left side of the mat. Wait, what is that place? Is it yours? Do you have somewhere else to go before the 30 days? No, but then move when you're ready. He hung up. June stood in her kitchen with the phone in her hand and the address written on the legal pad in front of her. She looked at it for a while. Then she found the building on her phone's map and looked at that too. She moved the following. Saturday. The apartment was on the second floor of a quiet building in Hell's Kitchen, 2 blocks off 9th Avenue. It was clean and already furnished a couch, a bed, a kitchen with real counter space. The windows faced west. The front door had a deadbolt that looked like it meant business. There was nothing on the walls, and the closet still had the smell of a place nobody had lived in for a while. June put her 2 bags and her box and her grandmother's Dutch oven in the middle of the living room and stood there looking at everything. It was a nicer apartment than she could have found on her own. It was free. She didn't know the man's name. She didn't know what he wanted in return. She made her bed. She went to class the next morning. She came home and cooked dinner and told herself she'd figure it out. 3 days later, she heard a key in the lock. She came out of the bedroom fast and then stopped when she saw who it was. He was standing just inside the door with another man behind him, scanning the room the way people scan rooms when they're looking for problems. "Security check," he said. Like that was a normal thing to say to someone whose apartment you just walked into. June said, "Okay." The other man went to the windows. The man, she still didn't know his name, stood in the middle of the living room and looked at the walls and the doors in the hallway. June went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. He said, "You don't need to do that." "I know," she said. And she put a mug on the counter anyway. He watched her do it. He didn't say anything else. His guy finished the windows and said something low. The man nodded. He walked to the door. Then he stopped. The latch on the second bedroom window is loose. "I know," June said. "I called the building manager yesterday. He's coming Thursday." A pause. "Short Thursday," he said. "Thursday," she said. He left. The door closed behind both of them. June stood in the kitchen with the full, untouched mug on the counter. She poured it out and stood at the sink looking at the window and thought about a man who came to fix things and found nothing to fix. She had been in the apartment for 3 weeks when she woke up at 2 in the morning to the sound of her front door opening. She was out of bed fast, standing in the dark hallway in her socks, and he was already inside. He had his back against the wall just past the door. One side of his jacket was dark and wet in a way that took her a second to figure out. He said, "Don't open that door. No matter what you hear outside." Calm voice, not calm legs. He went down the wall slowly and ended up on the floor. And then he stopped moving. June stood in the hallway. She stood there for 3 full seconds. Then she went to the kitchen, grabbed the dish towel off the oven, picked up her phone, and typed into YouTube, "Deep cut first aid." She hit play on the first video. Walked back to him, got down on her knees, and started working, hands shaking a little, talking herself through each step under her breath, doing what the video said, one thing at a time. His phone buzzed on the floor next to him. She glanced at the screen, a name she didn't recognize. She turned it face down and went back to what she was doing. It buzzed for more times. She ignored all of it. She worked for maybe 20 minutes, maybe more. She watched 2 more videos when the first one ran out of things to tell her, when she'd done everything she could think of. She sat back against the wall across from him and put her hands in her lap and looked at him. His chest was moving. She watched it go up and down. She kept watching it, and the minutes passed. and the city made its regular noises outside. And at some point, her face just started doing what it does when she's been running on adrenaline for too long and there's nothing left to hold it together. She wasn't making any noise. Just her eyes. It was almost morning when he opened his eyes. He lay still for a moment, looking at the ceiling. Then he turned his head and saw her sitting across the room, knees pulled up. Tear tracks on her face she hadn't noticed. Watching him, she said, "You're not dead." Her voice came out smaller than she meant it to. He looked at her for a moment, and then he laughed. Not a polite laugh. Not a small one. A real, short, surprised laugh, like she'd caught him completely off guard, and his body just reacted before he could stop. June wiped her face quickly and looked away. He looked back up at the ceiling. The laugh was gone, but the quiet that came after it was different from the quiet before it. Softer, somehow. Like something had moved in the room that neither of them was going to name. Outside the window, the sky was just starting to get light. Neither of them said anything else. He was still looking at the ceiling. When the sun came up, June had fallen asleep against the wall sometime around 5 in the morning. Her head dropped to the side, the dish towel still in her lap. Cole had been awake for the last hour watching. The light change in the room and doing what he always did when something didn't go according to plan, going back through every decision that led to this moment and figuring out where the error was. The error, as far as he could tell, was standing in front of a girl he didn't know at a party he wasn't supposed to be at. Everything after that had been his own doing. He sat up slowly. His side pulled and he let it. He looked over at June, mouth slightly open. Hair across her face, completely out, and he thought about the fact that she had stayed up most of the night watching YouTube videos to keep him alive and had not once asked him a single question about what had happened to him or who had done it or why he was in her apartment at 2 in the morning covered in someone else's intentions. She had just dealt with it. He stood up, found his jacket, and left before she woke up. He came back that evening with 2 of his men and a change of clothes, and the information that he needed to stay off the radar for a while. Weeks, maybe longer. The apartment was the only address in the city that had no paper trail back to him. No lease in his name, no utility account, nothing. He'd bought the building through 3 different shell companies 2 years ago for exactly this kind of situation. He had not factored in there being a girl from Pennsylvania already living in it. June was at the kitchen table doing homework when he walked in. She looked up. She looked at the bag in his hand. She looked at his 2 men standing in the doorway. She said, "How long?" He said, "I don't know yet." She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back at her laptop. "There's food in the fridge," she said. "Don't touch the container on the second shelf. That's my lunch for tomorrow." One of his men looked at Cole. Cole said nothing. He put his bag down and went to the window and looked out at the street and thought about the fact that he had walked into his own safe house and been assigned a shelf. The first few days were quiet. Cole worked from the kitchen table after June left for class in the mornings. His men rotated through in shifts. June came home in the afternoons, cooked, and acted like having a man with a laptop and 2 rotating security guards in her apartment was a perfectly normal living situation. She did not ask what he did. She did not ask why people were trying to find him. She asked him once to move his laptop charger because the cord was across the floor and she kept stepping over it. And when he didn't respond right away, she unplugged it herself, moved it to the other side of the table, and plugged it back in. He looked at the charger. Then he looked at her. She was already back in the kitchen the second night. She made a pot of something thick and pale that smelled like nothing he recognized. He ate, standing at the counter with his back to the room, because sitting down felt like agreeing to something. He didn't know what. He ate all of it. The 3rd night he sat down. On the 4th night he looked across the table at the pot on the stove and said, "What is that?" Not a question, exactly. More like something that came out before he caught it, June said, "Pot pie. Pennsylvania Dutch. My grandma's recipe. It doesn't look like pot pie. That's because you've only had the frozen kind." He looked at her. She was eating and not looking back at him. He picked up his fork. He didn't say anything else. But the next evening when he came back from the one meeting his men had cleared his safe, he noticed the pot was on the stove again, and the apartment smelled the same way. And he sat down before she put the bowl in front of him. She didn't comment on that either. June talked to herself. When she was looking for something, Cole discovered this on day 5 when he was on a call in the living room and heard her in the kitchen saying, "At a normal conversational volume? Okay. I put it somewhere smart, which means I have no idea where it is." Then the sound of cabinets opening and closing. Then there you are. "Why are you in there? That makes no sense." Put the call on mute. She came out of the kitchen with a measuring cup and went back to what she was doing. He took the call off mute and finished his conversation. When he hung up, one of his men, a guy named Darren, who had worked with Cole for 6 years and had never once commented on anything personal, was looking at the kitchen doorway. Cole said, "Don't." Darren looked back at his phone. 2 days later, June made a joke at dinner. It was about the parking situation on their street. Something about how the alternate side rules were written by someone who wanted people to suffer specifically on Tuesdays. It was a quiet joke, the kind that takes a second to land. Cole didn't react. She waited a beat, realized it hadn't landed, then explained it. The explanation was worse than the joke. He looked at her while she was explaining it. She was completely serious. When she finished, she went back to eating like nothing had happened, and Cole sat there and felt something in the back of his chest that it took him a moment to identify. It was the beginning of a laugh that he didn't let out. He looked down at his food. He kept his face straight. But it was close. It was a Wednesday night, about 10 days in. When she made the apple cake, he came in late from a call that had run long, and the apartment smelled warm and simple. And she was at the counter cutting pieces onto plates. He didn't ask what it was. He just sat down. She put a plate in front of him and sat across the table and said, "My grandma made whenever someone in town died. Like, not as a celebration or anything. She just said your hands need something to do when you don't know what else to do." She said it casually, not like she was telling him something. Just talking. Cole looked at the cake. He was quiet for long enough that a normal person would have moved on to something else. June waited. She didn't fill it with more words, which was unusual for her. He said, "She died on a Thursday. I was in a meeting when they called." He paused. "I finished the meeting." He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the plate. June didn't say she was sorry. She didn't say anything. She just stayed at the table and let the quiet sit there without trying to fix it, which was the exact right thing to do and also the thing almost nobody did. He ate the whole piece of cake. When he was done, he got up, rinsed the plate, and went to his room. June sat at the table for a while after that. She thought about a man who got a phone call that his mother was gone and finished his meeting first. And she thought that was the saddest thing she'd heard in a long time. And she didn't say that to him, but she made the cake again the following week, without being asked. He heard her on the phone with her mother one afternoon, not on purpose. He was coming down the hallway and she hadn't heard him. She was saying, "I'm fine, Mom. I found a place. It's good. The neighborhood is fine." Pause. "No, I'm not going to tell you what the rent is," she laughed. "Because you'll worry." He stopped in the hallway and listened. "The scholarship is fine. Everything is fine. I need you to trust that I can handle things." Another pause. Longer. I know. I'll call Sunday. Tell Grandma I said hey." She hung up. She stood at the window for a moment looking out. Cole went back to the kitchen, the long way around, and didn't say anything about it. But that evening, when she mentioned offhand that her university library job was cutting her hours, he made one phone call, and 2 days later, she had a paid research assistant position in the university's history department. More hours. Better pay, flexible schedule. She didn't know he'd done it. He didn't tell her. Darren, who had watched the whole thing, said absolutely nothing. He was learning. About 2 weeks in, June was in the kitchen, and Cole was on the phone in the living room. She wasn't trying to listen. She could just hear him. He was dismissing someone. She didn't know who or why. She only heard his half. He was calm and final about it. No argument, no explanation. Just, "This is how it is, this is done, don't call again." He hung up. She came out of the kitchen. She wasn't planning to say what she said next. It just came out. "Do you actually like anyone in your life?" He went very still. She heard herself. "Sorry, I didn't mean to say that out loud." "Yes, you did." She stopped. He looked at her for a moment. Not angry. Something harder to read than angry. "No," he said. "Just that." "Then, go study." She went. She sat at the desk in her room and opened her laptop and stared at a blank document for 20 minutes. She thought about a man who answered that question directly, instead of defending himself or getting offended, and what it meant that he'd answered it at all. In the living room, Cole sat on the couch and looked at the wall and thought about the fact that a 21-year-old from rural Pennsylvania had just asked him the most honest question anyone had put to him in years, and he had answered it. Aiden showed up on a Thursday. June was coming back from class, crossing the street toward the building when she saw him on the front steps. He stood up when he saw her. He looked like he hadn't been sleeping well. He said, "I just want to talk." June stopped at the bottom of the steps. She kept her voice level. "Okay, I was an idiot. The whole thing, the party. All of it. I was being an idiot, and I let my friends push me into something I shouldn't have done, and I'm sorry."
Ouch.
June looked at him. "Okay, that's it? Okay? What do you want me to say, Aiden?" He ran a hand through his hair. "I want you to, I don't know. I want to fix it." "There's nothing to fix," she said. "Not mean about it. Just clear. We're done. I've been done. You should go." She walked past him and went inside. She didn't know there was a camera on the building entrance. She didn't know Cole had seen the whole thing from a live feed on his laptop. She didn't know that after she came upstairs and went straight to her room and closed the door, Cole sat very still for a long time staring at the screen. He wasn't thinking about strategy. He called Darren and said, "Stay close to her when she's off campus." Aaron said, "You want me to explain that to the rest of the team?" Cole said, "No." What June didn't know, what she had no way of knowing, was that Aiden coming back to the building wasn't just Aiden being sorry. Gerald Whitmore had sent him. Gerald had spent 3 weeks quietly figuring out who the man in the video was. When he found out, he'd gone cold, and then he'd gotten methodical. He couldn't touch Cole directly, so he looked for another angle. He found one. A word to the right administrator at June's university. A fabricated academic conduct report. Something about plagiarism. Something easy to file and hard to fight immediately. The kind of thing that gets a scholarship frozen while it's under review. The kind of thing that can take months to resolve if the right people are slow about it. It would cost Gerald almost nothing. It would cost June everything. Cole found out about it before she did. He had someone inside the university's administrative office, not for this reason. For other reasons, and they flagged it the same afternoon. It was filed. He sat with that information for about 4 minutes. Then he made calls. Not patient ones. Not the kind he usually made, where everything was measured and timed and calculated 3 steps ahead. These were short and direct, and by the end of them, he was standing up, and his jaw was tight, and Darren was watching him. From across the room with an expression that said he had never seen this before, by the next morning, the conduct report was gone. The administrator who filed it had quietly resigned. Gerald Whitmore had lost access to 2 business contracts and a building permit that he'd been waiting on for 8 months. Things that mattered to him considerably more than one student's scholarship. And he knew exactly what the message was. Aiden disappeared from the picture entirely. June found out 3 days later. A friend in her department mentioned it casually, as gossip that someone had apparently tried to file something against her, and it had been shut down almost immediately. June went to the administrative office herself and asked. The woman at the desk pulled up her file, looked at it, and said, "There's nothing here." "Your record is clean," June said. "Was there something filed against me?" The woman looked at the screen again. "Not that I can see." June walked out of the office and stood in the hallway and thought about that. That evening, she came home and found Cole at the kitchen table, and she stood in the doorway and said, "Someone tried to do something to my scholarship." He didn't look up from his laptop right away. Then he did. "How do you know that?" he said. "I heard about it. Someone told me there was something filed, and then it was just gone." She looked at him. "Did you know about it?" He held her eyes. "Yes. Before it happened, or after?" "Before." She was quiet for a moment. "How?" "I have people in a lot of places. My university's admin office." "Apparently." She looked at him. "How long has that been the case?" Put the laptop down. He said, "Since the night I gave you the key." The room was quiet. "The camera on the building entrance?" She said, "Yes." The building manager. "Who fixed the window?" "He reports to me." Since the beginning, she stopped. She looked at the floor and then back at him. "Why?" He was quiet for a moment, not avoiding the question. More like finding the right answer in a place he didn't usually go looking. He said, "You stayed." She looked at him. "What does that mean?" He didn't explain it. He just looked at her with that same direct expression he always had. Except this time, there was something underneath it that hadn't been there before. June stood in the doorway of the kitchen for a long moment. Then she went in and started making dinner. She didn't leave the room. She stayed in it like she always did. And Cole watched her move around his kitchen and thought about how that was the only answer he'd needed. A week later, Aiden came to her campus. He found her between classes near the library. He looked worse than the last time. He said his father had used him, that he hadn't known what was being done with the information he'd passed along. That he was sorry for all of it. The party, the scholarship thing, everything. Some of it was probably even true. June listened to the whole thing. She didn't interrupt. When he was done, she said, "I believe that your dad used you, but you still chose to do what you did at that party. You chose it. Nobody made you pick up that glass." She picked up her bag. "I hope things get better for you," she said. "I mean that." She walked away. Darren was parked across the street. He watched her walk back into the building, called Cole, and said, "She handled it." Cole said, "I know. You've been watching." Cole moved out on a Sunday morning. 3.5 weeks underground, and the situation had resolved enough that it was safe for him to go back to his regular life. He had his bag packed and his men downstairs. He came through the living room, and June was in the kitchen making coffee. She said, "You could at least stay for breakfast," he said. "I have somewhere to be." "You always have somewhere to be." He picked up his jacket. He crossed the living room. He had his hand on the door frame. He stopped. He stood there for a second. Then he turned back toward the kitchen. Not all the way, just enough. "The pot pie," he said. "Write down how you make it." June looked at him from the kitchen doorway. "Why?" "Because I'm going to want it again." She looked at him for a moment. He looked back at her. Neither of them said anything else. He left. June stood in the kitchen and listened to the front door close, and then the sound of the elevator down the hall, and then nothing. She stood there for a bit. Then she opened the kitchen drawer, took out a notepad and a pen, and sat down at the table. She wrote down the recipe from the beginning. Every step. The way her grandmother had taught her the right flour, the right stock. How long to let it sit before you cut it. She was almost done when she realized. She was smiling. She hadn't noticed when it started.